Okay, so I've got 24 slides to try to get through in 45 minutes. And so if I could ask you to, if you have any questions as we go along, enter your questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to get to as many as possible. And then there's going to be a follow-up to this that we're going to talk about in a little bit. So some general information. The iPads are managed by a tool called Workspace One. Workspace One is a cloud-based tool, meaning it's on the internet. As long as you have a web browser and access to the internet, you can log into Workspace One and configure the iPads. Prior to 2018, this product was known as AirWatch, and you'll still see the letters AW in some of the descriptions or details about the product, such as when you log in, cn420.awmdm, that's AirWatch MDM, because this is a mobile device management platform. There's a couple different platforms out there for managing mobile devices, and a mobile device really can be defined as any laptop, even a desktop sometimes fall into that category, any tablet or smartphone. So this product, via Workspace One, it was made by VMware. It's not made by Apple, even though we're using it to only manage Apple devices. And that can lead to some confusion because perhaps Workspace One might refer to a particular feature by one name, and Apple might refer to that as a different name. And that's just because Workspace One is designed to manage products not only by Apple, but also Google Android, by Microsoft. And so if things are different, named differently on different platforms, Workspace One is going to try to find a common name, which might not always match what you're expecting to see. So little inconsistencies are going to happen from time to time. Another downside of this is sometimes you get the finger pointing of when we call Workspace One or VMware support and say this isn't working, they might say call Apple, and if Apple says call Workspace One, and so sometimes we don't always get a straight answer to support questions. But overall, it's a great product for what it does, and hopefully after this presentation you'll have a pretty good understanding of it. But there are a lot of features in it that we're not going to be using, and I'll point those out just so that you could just to avoid the section, so you don't have to spend any time trying to look for something in a section that we're not using. The iPads will pull their configuration from Workspace One on a regular interval. So Workspace One doesn't push configurations to the iPad. The iPads have to pull their configuration. Usually it's about once an hour, but there's intentionally, it staggers that because it doesn't want to overload the network with 100 iPads all downloading a software update at once. So whenever you try and do something in Workspace One, don't wait until the day before you need an app to try and deploy it in Workspace One. Try to do it a week before if you have that much time, because it's not going to happen right away. It seems like the more in a hurry you are, the slower it's going to go. But that's just the way it goes, because it is designed to manage thousands of devices, and it doesn't want to overload your network. We recommend that each person who's going to be managing Workspace One, as well as Apple School Manager, each have their own individual accounts. It's best not to share accounts between people, partly because if you ever need to reset your password, it's going to prompt you for those security questions. And if you look at the last bullet on that screen, unfortunately, Workspace One does have kind of a ridiculous requirement that passwords need to be changed every 30 days. And I'm not sure why that is a requirement. I don't know of any other product that requires every 30 days you change your password. But I even opened a ticket with support and asked them to change it, and they said they would. So because you will, as long as you have security questions in there and you know the answers to them, it's pretty straightforward to reset your password. I've had to reset mine many times. And so another good reason why I don't recommend you share accounts. And next, we'll talk about how to identify a particular iPad. If you ever send me an email and say, I need help with this particular iPad, the asset tag might be something that it's tempting to use. An example of an asset tag might be like 2019 C-0034. But that's not that helpful for me, because that asset tag isn't searchable in Workspace One. It's not searchable in Apple School Manager. I'd have to go back to when it was first ordered to look that up. But the most useful name is the enrollment username. And this can be found by opening the Hub app. Many schools will put a little label sticker on the front of the iPad that shows the enrollment username. Examples would be, usually there's a 4 or 5 character abbreviation of the school name, dash, either STUD or TEAC, followed by a 3-digit number. And there have been some exceptions to that during COVID. We deployed some iPads that didn't follow that same rule, but for the most part, that's what they're going to be. And the password to log into each of the accounts, for the most part, it's going to be the same letters. Instead of a dash, it's going to have a dot, and then it will not have the letters STUD or TEAC, and then the numbers will be the same. So you should be able to guess the password for most accounts, but somebody might have always changed the password. That's always a possibility. So if it doesn't work, you can go into Workspace One and reset it, or you could send me an email and have me reset it for you. You should have received an inventory sheet with your iPads that also included all these enrollment usernames. The serial number is also very helpful because you can search either in Apple School Manager or in Workspace One based on the serial number. Usually it's 12 characters, although some of the newer iPads, it is 10 characters, but it's always a mix of letters and numbers. You can find it on the iPad by going into the Settings, General, About, and you can also find it on the back of the iPad. It's laser etched in there in very, very tiny characters. You might need a magnifying glass or maybe take a picture of it with your cell phone and then you can zoom in on the photo and view it there. Or ask a student to read it. Their eyes are probably better than ours and they can probably read it better. But if you're sending me an email and you're saying I'm having trouble deploying an app or deploying a software update, give me the example of one of the iPads that is having this issue, because without that, there's not much troubleshooting I can do. And either the enrollment username or the serial number is a great way to identify the iPad. Sometimes the IMEI can be helpful, but newer iPads have an eSIM, so they might have multiple IMEIs, so best not to worry about that. So I'll mention a few resources that are available to you if you need support. This website here, support.thesalesmedia.org/ipads.html. This is a long list of frequently asked questions that I've been creating and adding to in the 4 years that I've been with DeSales. You can do Control F on that page. I made it just one long list so that you can search on the page. For example, if you're searching for a VPP token, you want to know info about that, just do Control F on your keyboard, type in VPP, and it'll find the question related to VPP token really quick. So it's easily searchable. There's about 100 questions and answers on there. Usually if someone asks me a question and the answer's not already on there, I'll add it to there. And so if you send me an email asking me to do something, I might reply to you with a link to that and a link right to the question in that document. The Google group is another great resource. There's about 50 or 60 people in that group, other people who manage iPads at other schools, Chromebooks as well. And these are all people within the Diocese of Brooklyn. So people who are going to be, running into the same type of issues that you're running into most likely. And so if you have a question, sending an email to that group, there's a very good chance someone else had the same question and found a solution for it. If you want to recommend what kind of app do you think would be good in order to do such and such, most likely other people are doing the same thing and they can probably give you a great answer. That's the type of question that I wouldn't have the answer to because I don't use any apps with students. I sit, in front of a computer all day and just work on technology stuff. So, but these are your peers. And so you do need permission to join this group. We can add you. Just send an email to ipads@thesalesmedia.org. We'd be happy to add you. If you get this message over here, content unavailable, that means you're not in the group and you just need to request permission. And this is the very long email address to send an email that will go to everyone in the group. And at this website, you can view previous email threads from the group. And so you can search on questions that may have been asked in the past. For any questions related to the grant, for obtaining more iPads, replacing old iPads, instructional help, learning resources, that email is ctn@salesmedia.org. And Google searches are often very helpful. like I mentioned before, how Workspace One was created by one company that's and the Apple iPads were created by Apple because of the issue of not of it's never there's never any way to get great support because neither one can help us out that much. You'll find a lot of information online because other schools, other organizations that use Workspace One have encountered these very similar issues, and you'll find a lot of support forums where people ask questions and provide answers. So a Google search will often give you some good results. All right. So when you log into Workspace One, the first place that I always go is devices and then device list. This will show you a list of all your devices, and it's a great way to get some high-level info. Over here, this is the main navigation on the left, and I put this purple X, this I added in there. You won't see that when you log in. But these sections, freestyle, content, email, and telecom, we never use those sections because nothing we do is related to that. Those are related to other features in Workspace One that we're not using, so you don't ever need to worry about those. But and even getting started and monitoring, you're not going to use those all that much. Devices, resources, accounts, and groups and settings are going to be where you're going to be spending most of your time. So here we're in devices and list view. And if you're looking for any info related to one particular iPad, you can enter either the enrollment username or the serial number in the search box here, and it will come up and you can view the details on that particular iPad. You can also find it in this list and just click on the name of the iPad right there. If you click on general info at the top, it will sort by the names of the iPad, which will usually be in numerical order of the student numbers, followed by the teacher iPads after that. Also, you can sort based on last seen. Anything, if it's been seen in less than 8 hours, it'll be green. If it's more than 8 hours, it's red. But the red really doesn't indicate a problem. Most likely it's just powered off or something like that. As I mentioned, the iPads, they pull management server, and it's about once an hour, but only when it's powered on and connected to the internet. So if the Wi-Fi is turned off or the iPad is in sleep mode, it's not going to pull at all. So this device details, this is what you would see. I'm just going to back up one slide. If you clicked on an actual name here of an iPad, or you entered the search and then clicked on the name, and it'll take you to the details. I've got the red arrows pointing out a few interesting things. The last seen, 7 seconds. If you've got an iPad that you're actively using and it's on, it's connected to the internet, and this says something more than an hour ago, then that probably indicates a problem. Most likely the iPad doesn't have internet connectivity. So maybe open a web browser and make sure it's connected, check the Wi-Fi settings, because it should update pretty quickly. Excuse me. All right, so at the top, you can see the iOS version. That's always important to check. These are the smart groups. I'm going to talk about smart groups on the next slide. There's the serial number, very important. The storage capacity here, it's 128 gigs. Now, this is telling us there's 113 gigs free on this iPad. There's some info in Workspace One that you'll find isn't updated very frequently, and therefore it's often inaccurate. And this is an example of one. The storage capacity, this was a snapshot in time. Who knows when it was updated? Don't rely on that as being accurate. But the last seen time, that is always quite accurate. This apps tab, in about 3 slides, we're going to be on the apps tab, but I'm going to diverge just a moment to talk about assignment groups. So an assignment group is used to assign in either an app or a profile. Apps you're probably familiar with. Anytime you want to deploy an app to an iPad, you assign it to an assignment group. Profiles are where you manage settings like is Bluetooth enabled or is the camera enabled on this particular iPad. And there's 2 types of assignment groups. There's organization groups and smart groups. The organization groups are already created. You can't modify those. And typically you'll have 3. One, which is the top level of your school name. and that'll include all the iPads at your school. And then within there, there'll be one for students and one for teachers, and those are for the student iPads and teacher iPads. And for most schools, those are sufficient for assigning all of your apps and profiles. As long as you're okay with all of the iPads having the same settings, such as, Bluetooth enabled, or, access to YouTube or things like that. As long as you're okay with all the iPads having the same profile, then you don't need to worry about creating additional smart groups. And as long as you're okay deploying all the apps to all your iPads, then you don't need to create smart groups. But if you want to be more granular, like you want to have certain apps deployed to certain grades, then smart groups is the way to do that. You can create as many smart groups as you like. You can assign devices manually, like clicking on one each individually, or dynamically, and using tags would be the way most people do that. Although I think there's only 1 or 2 schools that have ever actually used that feature of assigning tags and then dynamically assigning to smart groups. But this is what it looks like. And before we were under devices, now we're under groups and settings, and then assignment groups. And then for group type, you could see there's 2 types. There's the smart groups at the top, and those you can click on and configure them. And then the organization groups at the bottom, and you can't click on those because you can't modify those. The column on the right is, you can see how many devices are in each of your assignment groups. You can see the number of assignments, and this is the number of apps and policies. You can also assign web clips, which are like shortcuts that appear on the home screen for certain websites. Those could be assigned as well. The exclusions, I don't think you would ever see an exclusion showing up there. If you do create a new smart group, I like to ask that you put your school's initial, the abbreviation, as the beginning, because when I look at the list, when you log in, you're only going to see the smart groups for your school. But when I log in, and for other people here at DeSales, when we log in, we see all of them, and there's hundreds and hundreds of them. And if they can be sorted by school, that's a little bit easier. But I'm mentioning here, like I said before, as long as you're okay with all the iPads essentially behaving the same with regard to policies and apps, you don't need to create any smart groups. But if you do choose to create a smart group, there's 2 ways you can assign them, either by a criteria or devices and users, meaning individually. And the criteria tags here is really the best criteria to use, or individually, you can just manually select them one by one. Sorry, I'm talking kind of fast here. I know we're under the gun here. Let's see, it's 20 minutes in, and I think we're okay. All right, so on this slide, we are back at devices, and we are under the device details, the detailed view of this particular iPad. Before we looked at the summary screen, now we're over on the apps tab. And these numbers here I added to highlight a couple elements. The last scan, this is the date and time, the last time the apps were scanned, which is usually will correspond to the last time the iPad checked in with the management console. And number 2, this list of apps here, this is going to be the same list you see if you go to the iPad and you open up the catalog app. And if you click on the little radio button here and you click the install button, that will essentially have the same effect as opening the catalog and tapping on the install button next to the app. If you tried that before, you know that sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So it's not like a typical install where it's like you're installing something on your desktop that you just downloaded. This is a cloud install where you're asking the management console to send an install command to the iPad the next time the iPad pulls the management console, which might not be for an hour. Excuse me. And so it's not going to happen right away. Let's see. Oh, another thing I'll mention is the name of the apps that appears here on the list won't always match the name of the apps that you see when you go in the App Store. It won't match what you see if you go into resources and apps, and it won't even match always what you see when you look at the home screen of the iPad. For example, here it says Classroom. Is that Apple Classroom or is that Google Classroom? I'm not sure. Maybe you can tell by the version number here, or if you click on it, but just little idiosyncrasies like that are things related to, because, the product was made by VMware and we're managing products made by Apple. Another thing, these two columns, the app status and installation status, I'm not sure why, but very often the info you see here, you just can't rely on it. I've seen a lot of times where it says installed, it's actually not, or it says not installed, but it actually is. So don't worry about too much what you see in there. And then the last thing, number 4, if you're troubleshooting a particular app install, well, the first thing I'll mention is if you're troubleshooting an app install and you don't see the app listed here, then the problem isn't here and the problem isn't on the iPad. The problem is with somewhere within resources, apps, and native. So resources right here. So it's actually a problem with the way the app is configured in Workspace One, not a problem on the iPad itself. So and then if you have an issue, you can click the little radio button next to the app name and then click on more and then choose troubleshooting. And that will show you some logs, and the logs can sometimes give you some information about what might be going on there. So before we were looking at the more button, it's a little confusing because pretty close to that is another button called more actions. So easy to confuse those two, but just remember they do completely different things. Under more actions, there are several things that are very useful, such as clearing the passcode. If you have an iPad that has a passcode assigned and you're not sure what it is, you can clear it right there. I mentioned Enterprise Wipe. Please don't ever choose Enterprise Wipe. That will actually remove it from Workspace One, so it's no longer a managed iPad, and we don't want to ever do that. But Device Wipe here, Device Wipe is a great troubleshooting step because typically there's no user data stored on the iPad. I mean, the student might have maybe, downloaded some pictures or put some music on the iPad, but usually it's not a big deal if you wipe that. And the Device Wipe is a great troubleshooting step. If the iPad is ever behaving in a way that it's just, you can't explain it, wiping the iPad is a great troubleshooting step because once you wipe it, it will reboot, and then once it'll come up and it'll ask you to choose the country, and it'll choose the language, and then it'll ask you to connect to Wi-Fi, and then you wait about 5 minutes, and then you'll see the home screen come up, and it'll install the Hub app and the Catalog app and maybe a couple others. As soon as you see the Hub app there, you can tap on that to open it, and then you'll need to log in again using the enrollment username and password that we talked about before. And then it could take up to 30 minutes to install all the apps because, like I said, it staggers the install. It doesn't do them all at once. But, it only takes about 5 minutes to get to the point where you log in again. And then you could just set that iPad down and leave it overnight. And tomorrow when you come in, it should have all the apps installed. And most likely whatever strange problem you were dealing with will be resolved at that point. Now, I have this up-down arrow here to show that even though you don't see a scroll bar here, you can actually scroll up and down in this drop-down menu. And like you can see, Device Wipe here at the bottom, here, it's up here. So I'm sorry, here, it's here. So here on this side, I've just scrolled down, and Find Device is a useful tool. You can, it'll play a sound like a ping tone from the iPad that's pretty loud. So if you know what classroom it's in, but you don't know where it is, you can click on Find Device and hopefully be able to find it. Lost Mode is another really useful feature. So here on the Location tab there, you'll actually see a map with the GPS location of the iPad. But I will warn you that it doesn't update that very often. In fact, I've seen times where it'll go months without updating it. So if you'd like it to update right away, very often, if you choose Lost Mode and put the iPad into Lost Mode, that will force it to update the location. It's not going to update it if the iPad's powered off or has no internet connectivity, but as long as it's on with connection to the internet, then it should update the location, and then you'll be able to see it there. Oh, before we go on, I'll also mention about lost mode. If you put a iPad in lost mode, it's going to prompt you to enter a message and a phone number. And the message you could put in, please call the school and let them know you have found one of our iPads. If you put the school's main number in there, be sure to tell the receptionist or whoever is going to answer the phone at the school that they might be getting a call about this iPad. And the iPad is completely unusable at that point. You can't get to the home screen. It's just going to display that message, and there's no way to bypass that message. So you will need to take it out of lost mode, which you can do right there at the same place once it's recovered. Now I'll talk about the profiles, and I won't spend too much time talking about these. It is a bit complicated to edit these. And for most schools, I would say more than half the schools never need to edit their profile. Some of the examples you could see allow using the camera, allow FaceTime, allow screen capture, allow screen observation, allow passcode modification. And this is a student profile that we're looking at here. And we have a default student profile and a default teacher profile that we maintain here at DeSales. And each time a new school gets their first iPad, I'll copy our default profile into a new profile for that school. And then you will have the ability to modify your school's profile that was based on the one that we created originally. So if you call me up and say, is Bluetooth enabled on the devices in my school? I could say, well, it was when we sent it to you, but I don't know if anyone had modified it in the however many years since you got your first iPad. But I can show you how to log in there and check that yourself. It's under resources and then profiles, and then find the one called either student profile or teacher profile for your school. And then, the checkboxes are pretty straightforward. And if you scroll down here, whoops, I didn't need to do that. This is another one of those pages where you don't see a scroll bar, but you actually can scroll down. And there's over 100 parameters in this list. And with each new version of iOS, they add more. And but I would say talk to your principal before you modify this, because some of these policies are in place because of diocese policies. And, we don't want you to give permissions to the students that they shouldn't have. So questions about that, you can send them to your principal or to us. Deploying software updates is pretty important. This is something that I recommend you do once a year. Deploy it to the latest version. To do that, we go under resources and then device updates. There's pros and cons to the fact that this is a cloud-based product. Cloud-based is great because it's always in the cloud. You can always log in from wherever you are. But the downside is that they can do updates whenever they want. And oftentimes we might not even know there was an update done. Excuse me. And so, I think just 6 months ago, this was under devices to do device updates. Now they moved it under resources. But you click on device updates and then click on iOS here, and then select the update you want to deploy, click on manage assignments, and then it takes you through a wizard that's pretty straightforward. You choose the day and time you want the deployment to begin, which you normally would choose today's date. And an important thing to remember is if some of your iPads are old and they don't support iOS 17, and you choose iOS 17 to deploy, then all those old iPads won't update at all. So you might want to choose the latest version of iOS 17, deploy that, and also do the latest of 16 and deploy that, and also do the latest of 15. And then each iPad will just select the latest that is supported on that iPad. And you can configure an update, and you could just leave it there. Just configure the assignment, leave it there for the whole year. And then, if you have an iPad that hadn't been powered on for a long time, when it is finally powered on, it'll start to download that update. Someone asked me recently, does the user have the ability to, for example, say no if the update is about to happen and they're in the middle of something? And I'm not really sure. I have a couple iPads here that I use for testing, but all my test iPads were already at the latest version of iOS. So I couldn't do a test deployment to those, but maybe if someone's done that recently, if you could put a note in the chat for everyone else and let us know, have you found it, does the user have the ability to say, no, I don't want to deploy this update now. So talking about Apple School Manager, every school has a login to Apple School Manager, and we strongly recommend that you have at least 2 people at each school that can log in. And that's because if someone forgets their password, the only way to recover it is to have someone else who has an account recover your password. You can't call Apple, or if you do, it's going to be a long process to have that reset. It's going to take a couple weeks because they're always worried that some creative student will try to reset the password for their school without their principal knowing about it. And so they make you go through a couple hoops to prove that you are who you are, say you are, before they let you. I think they're going to mail you something, and a letter in the mail, and then you have to mail it back to them. And it's going to take a long time. So always have 2 accounts so that somebody can reset the password of the other person. If you'd like, you can create an account for us here at the sales. And then we can always have kind of a backup to log into your schools in case everybody there forgets their password. But one nice thing about Apple School Manager, they never force you to change your password. So you can keep the same password for years if you like. To download apps in Apple School Manager, it's pretty straightforward. You just click on, log in, click on apps and books, type in the name of the app you want to deploy, click on the name of the app. And then it says you're buying licenses, and the vast majority of apps are free, but it's still called a purchase. So you're purchasing 500 licenses. And I always recommend you get more licenses than you need. Probably twice as many licenses as you have iPads, because sometimes as you do a software update, the new version might consume a second license before it releases the previous license, and there could be times where it's going to be using more licenses, so always good to have a few extras. And then these will show up automatically in Workspace One within 24 hours, and on the next slide I'm going to show you how you can get them to show up immediately. So this is what you see when you log into Workspace One, and you click on resources and apps and native. A native app as opposed to a web link. Apps are the apps that you're traditionally familiar with would be native apps, and the web links are more like shortcuts that appear on the home screen to go to websites. And then by default, it'll go to internal. This would be if we developed an app internally at the diocese and pushed it out to our iPads. We haven't developed any of our own apps. So, and then public apps, I don't even think for iPads there are. That's probably only related to devices other than iPads. So you always need to go to purchase. Even the zero cost apps show up under the purchased apps. And this sync assets button, this is where you go if you just downloaded it from Apple School Manager less than 24 hours ago, you can click here to sync assets, and then it will sync and show up immediately. Another thing about the names, so the name you see here might not match the name that you see on the home screen of the iPad, which might not match the name that you see when you go under the device details and click on the apps tab. I'm not sure why the names show up slightly different in the different places, but they do, and just not to be concerned about it. For example, sometimes Google Hangouts will show up as Google Meet and sometimes as Google Hangouts Meet. I'm not sure why. Sometimes it's different, and that's, you might think, oh, if it's a different version, it'll be that. But I've seen, even if it's on the latest version, it still might say Google Meet or Google Hangouts Meet. These 3 numbers here on the far right are pretty important. The first number is the number of licenses you have purchased. The middle number is the number that have been deployed, and that's a link there. If you click on that middle number, you will actually be able to see the 6 iPads in this case that have received this deployment. And then 494 is the available licenses. Always important to glance there, because if you ever see a 0 in this last column and you're having trouble deploying an app, that's most likely the reason. You just need to go back to Apple School Manager, purchase some more licenses, and then they'll automatically be deployed. In fact, on this next screen, here's an example of one particular school that had 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. All their apps were out of licenses, and I can only imagine how frustrating that must have been before they realized what the issue was. But and that's another reason I always say get more licenses than you actually need, because if you add 50 more iPads next year and you forget, or maybe someone else will be administering Workspace One next year and they won't know how many licenses you got, and it could be a source of frustration for them. So extra licenses, always a good thing. So this particular slide, this slide and 2 slides from now are going to be the single or the most common questions I get, or the most common issues related to the reason why an app isn't deploying. All apps by default use user licensing, user assigned licensing, meaning you have to log into the iPad with a Apple ID in order to download an app. If you've ever used an iPad on your own, not related to the diocese, you probably realize the very first thing it requires you to do is log in with an Apple ID before you can download any apps. And for the iPads that we deployed, no one's logging in with an Apple ID because we don't want to have to deal with the students having to remember the password to their Apple ID. So we use device assignment for every single app that we deploy. So as soon as you click this button, it will disappear. It's like a one-way change, changing it from user assignment mode to device assignment mode. So as soon as you click that button will be gone. You'll never see it again. So if you ever see it, be sure to click on it. Usually the first time you download an app, you'll see it, you'll click on it, and then you'll never see it again. So the second box here, licenses on hold. These would be licenses that you do not want to deploy. And especially if the licenses are free, there would never be a reason why you wouldn't want to deploy some of your licenses. So always put a 0 in that box. The next screen, when you click on add assignment in that previous screen, it'll bring up this. Usually you only need one assignment. And as long as you're going to deploy the app either to the student group, to the teacher group, or the school group, which contains all student and teacher devices, then one assignment is sufficient. But in this particular case, they've assigned it to a smart group, SG for smart group. And so if you are assigning them per grade level, you might have multiple assignments here. But the first time you open this, you'll just click on add assignment, and then it'll open up this window. And this can be a little bit tricky because, admittedly, this window isn't very user-friendly the way they laid it out. But the name at the top, you need to put in a name. It doesn't matter what you put in. Nobody else is going to see it. But it does have to have a name. And then as soon as you click here into whom do you want to assign this app, just click there once, and then you'll see your organization groups show up. The school name, students, teachers. You might also see a group for Chromebooks, and then with that, you might also see students and teachers under Chromebooks. Some schools had that for testing that we did. That was 3 or 4 years ago that was done, and they haven't been removed. It's kind of a long story why we haven't removed those, but just ignore anything you see related to Chromebooks in Workspace One, because we don't use Workspace One to manage Chromebooks at all. All Chromebook administration is done in Google Admin. All right, so here the numbers are saying this is the number that you need to enter under allocated. How many of your licenses that you've purchased do you want to allocate to this assignment? And this number needs to be greater than the number of devices, or greater than or equal to, but less than or equal to the total number of devices. If you make it less than, then all your iPads aren't going to get the assignment of that particular app. And if you make it greater than, you're going to get an error message because you're trying to allocate more devices than you own. So very often I'll just make this, I'll just allocate all my licenses to this one, even if it's way more than the number of devices. That's fine. That's not going to harm anything. I always recommend you leave the default, which is auto. However, in reality, I've seen many times where if you set it to on demand, the the app will still automatically deploy updates. And even if you set it to auto, sometimes it doesn't always deploy updates. So sometimes the apps don't adhere to this, but I always leave it on auto anyway. So we've got 4 more minutes, and this is the slide that was my wildcard slide. I could spend 15 minutes talking about this slide, or I could just say, read this on your own. But I think we only have 2 more slides left after this, so I'll spend 2 or 3 minutes talking about it. This is my list of troubleshooting app deployments. And if you've ever troubleshot an iReady deployment, you've probably gone through a similar series of steps like this. And I'll say that as long as you have sufficient memory on the iPad, I've seen every type of error message you can possibly imagine related to deploying apps. I've encountered numerous times where I'm like, I have no idea why this app won't install. But after going through this list of 10 steps, 100% of the time, I've been able to get the app to install, as long as there's enough memory on the iPad. And the very last one is to do a device wipe, which is like the end all. This will resolve just about any problem. But starting at the top, first looking at the Apps tab in Workspace One. You can also open the catalog on the iPad itself, because you're essentially looking at the same list in both places. And if you don't see the app there listed there, then the issue is in Workspace One under Resources and under Apps, because it's something related to the configuration. It's not related to something on the iPad. But as long as you do see it there, then you can go to More in Troubleshooting, and that might give you some clue as to what the issue is. Make sure you're on iOS 15 or later. Open up the hub and make sure it's enrolled. That's another really important one. If it's not enrolled, it's probably not going to deploy the app. So if you open up the hub app and it says enter username and password, that means it's not enrolled, and just enter in the enrollment information. And if you have trouble with that, you can send us an email at ipads@thesalesmedia.org. Checking the memory and available space. Those old iPads with 16 or 32 gigs, you're just kind of out of luck. There's a lot of apps that are not going to be deployed on there, no matter how hard you try. So if you do have those that you want to continue to use, I recommend create a separate smart group just for those, and then use them for the younger grades, the first grade, second grade kids that you don't mind if they destroy them, because they're so old anyway that there's not much you're still going to be able to do. Also, make sure you're on Wi-Fi. Most of the time, if you're on cellular data, it's not going to deploy the app because the bandwidth is going to be too slow. And even if you are on Wi-Fi, open up a website, go to Google and do Google bandwidth speed test and run a test to see what kind of bandwidth you're getting as far as downloads to the iPad. As long as you're at 2 megabits per second or greater, that should be just fine for deploying the apps. But if it's less than 2 megabits, especially if it's less than 1 megabit per second, it might be that the bandwidth at your school is really overloaded at that moment. Maybe try it after hours, or take the iPad home and do it there. Because if it's less than 2 megabits per second, it might not download the app at all. This we've seen with iReady a couple times, but it might also apply to other apps. You can touch and hold on the app on the home screen. Sometimes it'll start the download and it'll get hung up while it's downloading, and it'll never finish. So tap and hold on the icon on the app on the home screen. If you get the option to cancel download, then choose that. You might need to do it 2 or 3 times. It might not take it the first time. But if you do that, then there's a good chance that will clear it, because we have seen that it can get hung sometimes. Also, rebooting the iPad will resolve that a lot of times, kind of kickstart the update process. Sometimes leaving it powered on, connected to a charging cable overnight or over the weekend. Try connecting to a different Wi-Fi network, and then the device wipe. Numbers 7, 8, and 9, these are the real long shots. Most of the time, one of these first ones are going to resolve the issue. And 7, 8, and 9 is like, well, these are the long shots before you get to the final one of just doing the device wipe. Because that's when you're like, I have no idea what's going on. I'm just going to wipe it, and most likely that'll resolve it. Oh, also important, Cisco Umbrella. This is for filtering out inappropriate websites. It should be automatic on all the iPads. In general, you should never have to worry about it. If you ever want to test it, there's a website, the internet, it's just internetbadguys.com. That should always be filtered. You should always see this Cisco and Broad logo when it's filtered out. If there's a site that's blocked and you want it allowed, or you want a particular allowed site to be blocked, send us an email and we can either whitelist it or blacklist it. As of December, that should be 2023, sorry, December of last year was 2022, okay. We decided to block all of yahoo.com and bing.com because sometimes in their search results, it could show inappropriate images that they cache, whereas Google searches can filter that out. So that's why you might see that. And the policy is the same for all locations, regardless of whether you're on an iPad or a Chromebook, whether you're using the Safari web browser or Chrome web browser or Internet Explorer web browser. And it's the same on Wi-Fi or cellular. It's the same policy that's applied everywhere. The VPP token exchange, this is going to take you 20 minutes or so, but I've got step-by-step on how to do it here. This is something you will need to do every single year because the token is what links Apple School Manager to Workspace One. And the token is like a certificate that encrypts the communication, and it's in lieu of a password so that you don't have to log in from Apple School Manager into Workspace One. So you export the token in Apple School Manager and then you import it into Workspace One. These are the steps to go through it right here. It's pretty straightforward. It will take you about 20 minutes, but the file you download, and then you click on this right here to download it. This within Apple School Manager, just a couple months ago, they completely changed where to download this token. It used to be under a section called billing, but now it's under the section called MDM servers. And then you click on download token. That's just going to download a little file, a little text file that's referred to as the S token. And then you go into Workspace One and you click on import and you find it there and click on save and that will update it. And then the very last thing, if your school has iPads that were not provided by the sales media, but you would like them to be managed in Workspace One, in the past, we were always telling people, no, we're not going to allow that. But now we've had enough requests that we're saying, okay, we looked into it. We haven't tested it, but we think it's very likely it will work. So if you'd like to be the guinea pig and be the first one to try and test that out, we'd be happy to work with you to try and get that to work. DeSales will pay for the Workspace One license. So the devices can be in your DEP. In fact, they have to be in your school's Apple School Manager DEP. They can remain there because you own those iPads, not DeSales, but they can be added into our Workspace One and you'll be able to administer them and deploy apps to them. So just send us an email at ctn@salesmedia.org and we'd be happy to start working with you to do that. And thank you all very much.